Good evening, good afternoon, good night, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that's hopefully for somebody. I apologize for the 1 week off. For most film-going people, January is typically a slower month. I didn't have a huge amount of interest in Mithrigan or Megan, which I hear is quite good, but honestly, I did not want to go to the theater for it. But I'm glad that I took a couple days for James Gunn to make his announcement on what is going to be happening moving forward with the DCU. The DCEU obviously will no longer be with us, but we were given some details as to what is going to be going on with that. I've been filling my time with a couple shows, if anybody is interested. I've been rewatching Doctor Who because we are currently in the 60th year of Doctor Who. The specials to celebrate said anniversary don't come out until November, and it's been a long time since I watched all of the modern era of Doctor Who, so I've been doing that. The other thing of note is I have been watching Legend of Vox Machina Season 2, which just happens to have a significant correlation to DC as a whole, which is certainly funny. If you don't know what the connection is, it's that there was a DC shared universe amongst the direct-to-video films from DC's Justice League Flashpoint Paradox to Justice League Dark Apocalypse War, and the artist in charge of character design was actually Phil Barassa, who is in charge of character design for Legend of Vox Machina. So I think that's kind of fun. The announcement came yesterday. James Gunn, as I said, has given us the slate, or at least most of the slate for DCU Chapter 1, titled Gods and Monsters. I'm going to give my reactions to each project and how I feel about it, so let's get into it. The DC Universe is about to change again. So we are given a slate which does not include every project moving forward, but more distinctions, which is great. I think given the fact that James Gunn and Peter Seraphine have taken over, I've had 2 podcasts with friend of the show Stephen Colbert about exactly what's going to be going on, and now it's nice to have some clarity moving forward. So the outline given in the video, which you can watch on James Gunn's Twitter, and I believe it was all shared through the rest of the DC properties, which are Shazam! The Fury of the Gods comes out this March, which is loosely connected to the DC universe. We have The Flash, which is in June of this year. And then there's a big universe reset. Similarly to how things have been predicted of what was going to be happening with The Flash to begin with. I am very curious about how that film is going to work, given all of the changes, specifically with Batman, but we'll get into Batman and the Batman in a little bit. So yes, there's going to be a big universe change. Blue Beetle, which he said looks great and is coming out in August. And then we have Ant-Man. That is an entirely different universe. That does come out this year, actually in a couple of weeks. But Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom comes out at the end of the year. So we have 4 DC properties this year. As I mentioned in the intro, Chapter 1, and he did preface this by saying this is not the whole chapter, but this is some of the projects we're going to be having moving forward, which are what I think is most interesting amongst all of this is that there are some television series as well as some films. So this is an approach that has not been a part of anything DC has done since the inception of the DCE universe with Snyder. Clearly, we are getting projects that are going to be interconnected, which is something that seems to be very important to Warner Brothers as well as DC Studios. The first project announced is Creature Commandos, which is an animated series. One of the reasons it seems to be, at least from the announcement, is that due to budgetary restraints, now obviously they are not going to have infinite money to spend any amount on any project just because of whim. At the end of the day, this is still a business. So Creature Commandos is actually something I'm not familiar with whatsoever. It certainly fits in with something James Gunn does enjoy. He does say that he's written all the scripts for the episodes, which it seems to be as if the Dark Universe monsters, or the Universal monsters with Creature from the Black Lagoon, a Frankenstein, a Bride of Frankenstein, a cyborg, slight creature, and a really weird, slightly weasel-looking animal, at least in the promo art that I've seen from a run of this show, or a run of this comics, which is that they are a World War II team of freaks, which certainly fits in with the kind of stories, as I said, that James Gunn likes to tell. I don't know anything about this. I'm very curious. I thoroughly enjoy DC animation, so this is something I'm very curious about. One thing he made sure to say, which is an aspect of synergy that Star Wars does seem to be approaching more recently, which is that the actors who are providing the voices for this project will be playing the characters in live action moving forward. This certainly fits in with the monsters aspect of what has been announced. And as I said earlier, there are other TV shows that are going to be down the line with this. The next project announced was, I'm going to be frank with this part of the universe, honestly, quite moving forward. I was not a fan of the Suicide Squad. I thought it was fine. I thought it lent heavily too much on the tropes of James Gunn's projects, specifically with Guardians of the Galaxy. Obviously, it was more violent, it was more mature to some degree, and there were some elements of it I quite enjoyed. But the use of music and completely unnecessary title card locations, there were more aspects that I had issues with specifically. I think Peacemaker worked really, really well as an antagonist to other characters in that film, but ultimately I thought it was fine. I didn't think it was great. And the fact that there are heavy elements of that part of his DCEU experience moving forward, it's just not something I'm excited about. Viola Davis is a phenomenal actor. I really enjoyed The Woman King. That was an early episode that I recorded last year for this podcast, but fleshing out more of that part of the DC universe is just something I'm not interested in. I did not really enjoy Peacemaker. I understand that I'm in the minority when it comes to reception to that show, but it was not for me. I thought as well it was fine, and maybe it was slightly hamstrung at the time by things James Gunn was able to do outside of the stuff that he clearly had full reign to do. So Waller is a TV series coming out. I'm not overly excited about that. The next big thing is with an actual date, which is that Superman Legacy comes out in July of 2025. Super exciting that we are going to be getting a new Superman. It's going to be a young Superman. One of the things I'm most curious about, he has been teasing All-Star Superman, which is certainly interesting given the fact that that story is not about a young Superman. It's almost about a mature Superman who's lived a lot and experienced quite a bit, and I don't really want to spoil that comic if you have not read it. But what I'm more curious about, given the fact that we are getting a DC Universe reset, Rebirth, New 52, I'm very curious specifically on what aspects of Superman's early years they're going to be drawing from. I know that there was a lot of pushback to the run in the DC reset with the New 52, but I'm curious to see if we're going to get a Superman wearing a t-shirt and jeans, which would certainly be an aesthetic that people are not used to in the main media. It was a mixed reception, to say the least, in the actual run of the comic book film, or in the run of the New 52, and then obviously we did get a comic book reset in 2016, which seems to be received more positively than the previous reset. James Gunn is in fact writing this. There was a tease that he may or may not be directing it. I don't know. That's something personally I'm not interested in. If he is obviously he is the architect of the story for this, I'd be really curious in seeing somebody else direct it. This is not saying it's going to happen, because it's likely not given how busy he is with Netflix, but it's funny that a James Gunn script was directed by Zack Snyder. That will forever be referenced in this podcast, and I'm sure in other places with the history of DC moving forward, and with Zack and James' relationship prior. But regardless, we're moving forward with this. Who's the new young Superman? I have no idea. I'm not a casting director. I'm very curious to seeing who it's going to be. As somebody who did enjoy Henry Cavill as that character, it's really unfortunate that his last appearance is that in Black Adam. But you know what? Well, there always will be his appearances in Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, and Zack Snyder's Justice League. So, to say the least, I'm very curious about another Superman movie. It's very curious. He is one of those characters that people tend to say is hard to crack. I'm really hoping for James Gunn's case that he figured it out. The next thing I'm very much looking forward to, because it is another television series, an HBO Max series, which is Lanterns. It will be, as described, a true detective style television show about two space cops with Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart as they investigate and protect Earth from extraterrestrial crimes. I think this is a fantastic pitch. This is something I was really hoping for. It certainly leans more into the serious tone as opposed to the potentially Lethal Weapon style of comedic film style. This sentence is falling apart as I say it, which I apologize. I don't know if you're following specifically on Twitter, but I had a really rough day yesterday, so I'm really glad to talk about all this DC stuff, which is really exciting that we actually have stuff to look forward to that may or may not get made. Obviously, people are going to be making the joke we've had a DC slate before, but I think clearer heads may prevail this time, but I guess we will see. I'm excited about this. Sorry, that was a tangent. I think Green Lantern in general is a fantastic concept, and the fact that we are going to be getting two to start is really amazing. I hope that there is an opportunity to explore Oa and actually see the wider universe, knowing how much James Gunn does enjoy the off-Earth adventures of the characters he's written for Marvel. I'm really looking forward to seeing how he stretches out this universe and makes it feel like one cohesive space. The next thing announced in the line of properties is The Authority, which ironically is a Wildstorm property, which was written by Warren Ellis, which is about a group of characters similar to the Justice League that were essentially, what if the Justice League were a authoritarian group that killed and robbed and were just gods, quite literally, on Earth and ruled it as such. It's certainly interesting given the fact that the DC characters have had this brush stroked over their stories. There's obviously Superman Red Son. There is also a run of Superman Batman where their lives were changed, where Superman and Batman ruled over humanity. If you're a longtime fan of the DC animated universe with the shows from Batman, the animated series, all the way through to Justice League Unlimited, there was a run of the comics where, a run of the television series where one of the stories was about the fact that the League had gone rogue after killing President Luthor after the death of the Flash. So I think introducing these evil characters that may be a dichotomy to a building Justice League is really exciting. I think that certainly leans into that style of Watchmen-esque characters in the DC universe. If you've been following along with the comic books, that's been quite literally one of the main stories with the Doomsday Clock, is that the Watchmen characters were coming into the DC universe. That had very, very mixed reception, and in a way they are approaching this in a similar sense, but using different characters. So I'm very curious as to how they're going to be working on this within a universe of shared characters amongst the whole thing. The next project is certainly an interesting thing and may or may not answer questions on if we are going to be getting some cast members moving forward from other projects that have yet to be announced, which is Paradise Lost, which is a Game of Thrones style show that will be taking place on Paradise / Themyscira, which is the island home of the Amazonians, Wonder Woman being one of them. I'm very curious with some of the projects announced, specifically with Creature Commandos and Paradise Lost, but you could also get this to some degree from Green Lantern or from Lanterns, which is, are they, at the same time we explore this universe, are they going to use that as an opportunity to also tell stories throughout the length of time? Creature Commandos being World War II, Paradise Lost, likely, at least my assumption would be that it's going to be telling stories that are not in the modern day. That way you can fill out the timeline of your shared universe and not really have to go back and retcon things moving forward. That's been a criticism that I've had of the other shared universe, is that when they go back and retroactively change something in the continuity, it is sometimes a disservice to the properties or in films that had already come out and ruins fundamental moments of those stories. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that this is the case, because that would be really amazing for them to think out the whole timeline and potentially have made a Bible as to when things are going to happen within the entire run, which would allow you the possibility to watch something in chronological or release order. And I've thoroughly enjoyed having the opportunity to do that with the Marvel films specifically. The next piece of announced properties is something that I'm not happy about, if I'm being totally honest. This is not coming from somebody who is mad because they're recasting Ben Affleck. I'd accepted the fact that Ben Affleck was no longer going to be Batman a while ago, and I was excited about him having cameos in The Flash and Aquaman and The Lost Kingdom. Those may not be happening, but you know what? We still got Batman in Zack Snyder's Justice League the way that he had hoped he'd be in the film. But Batman the Brave and the Bold will be an adaptation of the Grant Morrison run of the comics, where Batman had a son named Damian Wayne. I hate Damian Wayne. I've never enjoyed the character throughout that entire run. I think he sucks. While, yes, he is an interesting dichotomy to Batman given the fact that he was raised by Ra's al Ghul as an assassin, he was the Robin that was in the run of the DC shared movie universe in animated form, and it's a character I've never enjoyed. I think it's interesting and telling. I saw this online given the fact that being the guy who's in charge of this, he didn't pick Dick Grayson, he didn't pick Carrie Kelly, and he didn't pick Tim Drake. If one of those characters is being used in The Batman Part 2, which was announced to be a part of Elseworlds, which, if you're unaware, is DC's out-of-continuity storytelling. I'm really glad that they did brand that as such. Specifically, he mentions Joker, the Batman, the Joker 2, which I forget the title off the top of my head, and The Batman, which is coming out October 2025, is titled The Batman Part 2. Which is very exciting, but those films and Teen Titans Go and Superman and Lois will be out of continuity, I'm glad that they are doing that and explaining that to an audience who may not be familiar with this, because this happens all the time in comic books, is important, given the fact that you won't expect any of the Batman we've seen before to show up in the shared universe films. Simplicity is the best, and being completely open and communicating effectively with your potential viewers is significantly important, especially when you are resetting a universe and hopefully having a successful shared universe moving forward. I don't like Damian Wayne. One interesting aspect about The Brave and the Bold, if it is going off of the Grant Morrison run, is that Bruce is missing. And it's Dick Grayson who is Batman, which would certainly also fill out a history of this character. Batman having a child automatically, at least in my mind, makes him not a younger man. He's somebody who's been Batman for a while. He had developed this relationship with Ra's al Ghul and Talia al Ghul to the point where she tricks him into fathering a son because they thought he was the ultimate person to take over. He was the specimen that would eventually be the successor to Ra's al Ghul. That again builds in a really interesting history, and I can see why that would be somewhere to start. Ironically, something that also happened when Zack Snyder was starting the universe with Ben Affleck. We got a Batman that was on the Dark Knight Returns run who had a history. He had a Joker. He had a Robin who had been killed. So this is not a Batman from scratch. It would be very weird, at least in my mind, to be telling a story with a new Batman who is having a kid from the get-go and does not have a relationship with this person. Obviously, he does, given the fact that if Damian is going to be Robin, which would be something you would assume if you're announcing that Damian Wayne is the Robin, is a older child, so 10 onward, potentially heading towards preteen or young or teenager. He's been Batman for probably that long, so this is not a rookie or super veteran Batman. It may be Batman in his prime, which is not casting a young actor. It could potentially be somebody as young as late 20s. No, well, maybe not, but certainly in their 30s. And that automatically will put again, a similar relationship if Batman and Superman in this universe are going to interact with each other, because you're going to have somebody who's been doing it for significantly longer than the other person. Well, which is just, I find it interesting that similarity between the previous mess of a shared universe is going to be, may have moving forward with this. The next project is Booster Gold, which will be an HBO Max series. It's certainly interesting to me that we are getting this character, but at the same time, if you are somebody who is familiar with James Gunn's history with comic book characters, he does enjoy exploring characters that are not well known by people. The only real interactions or exposure to this character outside of the comic books, if you are just a viewer of television and films of this character, is very minimal. It's a character that does show up in Justice League Unlimited very briefly. He then had an episode in Smallville, and they were teasing him in Legends of Tomorrow. Now, Booster Gold is a character from the future, the 31st century, who uses his knowledge of history and technology to come back to our modern time and be a superhero. It's almost like, what if an influencer from now went back to 1994 and became a superhero? Honestly, now that I've said that out loud, I don't know. I've liked Booster Gold, but he needs to be balanced well with another character. Their relationship in the comics that Booster Gold typically has is with somebody like Blue Beetle. They actually were a part of, I believe, Justice League Detroit, if I remember that correctly. I may not be, but it's not. There are characters that they are specifically using that, in not having a huge fan base in terms of somebody like Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman, there is more flexibility that I think is a very good thing. You do not want to build this universe on just the icons, because if one of those is a misstep, then things could potentially go wrong, which I find really interesting. But at the same time, we are getting a Wonder Woman show, a Batman show, a Batman film, a Superman film, and a Supergirl film. Now, that's the next piece of news. What I find very interesting, and this was this part of this whole announcement that I'm very, very curious about, which is the fact that this universe at the same time is rebooting a lot, but is also not changing things. And with Superman World of Woman of Tomorrow, Supergirl is in The Flash, or may have been cut from the entire film. And this is a character I was really looking forward to seeing. I love Kara Danvers, or Kara Zor-El. I was a fan of Melissa Benoist's version of the character in the CW television show. The series that this is based off of sounds like it's a very different origin story for Supergirl, where she actually grew up just outside of Krypton and kind of was left to her in destitute all by herself after the planet exploded. So a character experiencing things in space from a Kryptonian point of view, and then also having a Kryptonian's point of view from Earth, could be really interesting separation in mentalities when those two super people meet, which I'm really looking forward to. Most of the things in this, I think, are really intriguing. What's going to be a really big indicator for the tone of these properties, I'm hoping for, is specifically who they have attached to these, who's been cast, and to some degree, this is based on a visual medium of comic books, what they look like. Not the people, but the art aesthetic. The cinematography certainly is going to be important. A lot of these projects I want to be excited about. I understand that there's a passionate fan base for the Snyder films and are going to be anti anything else related to the DC universe, which is really unfortunate, because these characters do deserve better. Not in terms of what Zack did with them, but what everyone around the DCEU prevented from happening. There was a plan, and then things went awry, and we sort of got a smodge podge, throw crap at the wall, hope it sticks universe, which fundamentally was really disappointing into what it turned into. And the hierarchy of power was supposed to change about 3 months ago. Obviously, that wasn't the case, but knowing what we are going to get, or what we hopefully will get, is something I'm looking forward to. Stability is most important to me more than anything else with this announcement of the projects. I'm hoping in the near future, if we're supposed to get a film by 2025, these things should realistically, if we are in 2023, start progressing in the next 6 months, at least. Maybe not casting, but we do know who the slate of writers is going to be. I will get into that at the very end. One thing that's really curious, especially given its most recent television series, is the last announced project, which is Swamp Thing, which will be a film. The Swamp Thing television series on DC Universe was fantastic and ultimately was canceled due to budgetary reasons, which was really unfortunate. It was something quite special, and I honestly don't know if you're going to be able to watch it anywhere legally anymore, given the fact that HBO Max is pulling projects left and right. The most interesting part... Siri, that's enough. The thing that I find very cool about what's happening now with the DC Universe is who's going to be involved. One filmmaker who has seriously teased his involvement, and I think is pretty much just telling us he's going to be doing that, is making my most anticipated film of the year, with James Mangold is going to be in charge of Swamp Thing. Now, I have had messages from listeners saying that they do not want this to happen, given the fact that James Mangold has not really done horror, which I understand is a fair hesitancy, but given how well he handled Logan, and I know there was some criticism over the Wolverine, I would tend to lead towards studio interference as to why that film kind of falls apart in the third act. Indiana Jones, I'm very much looking forward to. As I said already, it's my most anticipated film of 2023. I think that's really exciting. If the DC Universe moving forward can actually be somewhere where they bring in creatives to tell stories that have been sort of made loosely out, but allows them to tell really interesting stories in this first chapter, is awesome. I'm very curious as to what the remaining parts of chapter 1 are going to be. I love the fact that it is titled Gods and Monsters, because we are getting creature commandos. We're getting Waller, who's a monster in her own right, as well as the Authority, also monsters, also act like gods, and Swamp Thing. And then you get the trio of a Wonder Woman project, a Batman project, and a Superman project, and Green Lantern, who are the gods of the DC Universe. Supergirl also being somebody you can throw into the category of gods. I think it's very cool that these are the projects listed. As much as it could be very easy to be dismissive of everything James Gunn has announced, and the DC Universe has never lived up to its potential. I'm very much hoping that it does, because these characters deserve better. The iconography of the holy trinity of DC characters with Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman, I think we're treated well for the most part in the DCEU, but everything outside of that has been a mess. The Flash film was announced, I believe, almost 10 years ago, and it is finally coming out in 2023. Blue Beetle is a film I'm very much looking forward to. Xolo Maridueña, also Miguel from Cobra Kai, I think is a young up-and-coming actor that will be somebody that will represent the Latinx community as a superhero, which is an underserved group in the superhero community. I'm very much a fan of that character, and the fact that we are exploring the universe in a cosmic but also earthbound way, I think is really, really smart, given the fact specifically, and I don't even know if this is the case, but Blue Beetle has some significant connections to off-world things. If you watched Young Justice, you would know what I'm talking about specifically. I don't want to ruin anything that may be teased in these projects, but 2023 is a new year. I'm trying to tackle these things with optimism. There are projects that I am less looking forward to, specifically with Waller and Peacemaker things, but there are some interesting projects in here. I would love nothing more than for this universe to make me love Damian Wayne. That may be the hill that I'm going to die on, given the fact that I'm not a fan of that character. Could that potentially mean that we are getting a Tim Drake or a Dick Grayson in The Batman Part 2? I have no idea. Teen Titans Go continues to exist, which is unfortunate because I do not think that show is very good. But other than that, there's an interesting slate here. What does it mean? Honestly, at this point, being completely frank, nothing. It's interesting how James Gunn, over the time he's had this job, has decided of how he is going to announce the initial slate. While it may be incomplete, I'm just keep crossing my fingers that at least most of these projects make it to the finish line and I get to watch them on Crave or HBO Max, or I get to see them in the theater, because I would love nothing more than there to be a successful DC universe with good films that get to continue moving forward, and also, for the studio's sake, make money. Because as I said earlier in this podcast, at the end of the day, that's pretty much the main goal for these. And I would really love for there to be not a shared tone, that's not what I want to say, a shared success of quality as well as unique stories tonally that are a variety of styles, because that's what the comic books are. They're not all the same, and I would love for that to be the case. The DC Universe is going to change again, hopefully for the better. I'm looking forward to it. We will see when it starts, March 17th, 2023 with Shazam. That has been the Film Realist Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Naranya. I will see you next time.